Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Constructing Kingdoms with the Violet Howler, a literary analysis of the Kingdom Hearts story. For today's episode, I'm going to be discussing this whole concept of unreality that recent titles have introduced and how it fits into the established narrative of the series. Because looking back at the series as a whole, this idea of a fictional world is simply the logical extreme of ideas and concepts that the series has been exploring the entire time. Nearly every game in the series has involved scenarios where our main characters heavily interact with things that are not considered real, but grow to become real over the course of the narrative, like computer programs, or the empty shell of a person who was consumed by darkness. There's also particular emphasis on simulated worlds that do not physically exist in the so-called real world. From dreams and memory worlds to computer simulations, even a literal storybook. So this concept of a world of fiction completely outside the boundaries of reality is not anything new to the story. Rather, it's the culmination of a narrative thread that the series has been quietly building up to from the very beginning. An answer to the question of what makes someone or something real. How one defines what does or does not exist. Because through these patterns, the series is demonstrating that reality is subjective, something which is cemented by Nomura's interview with Famitsu magazine shortly after Kingdom Hearts 4 was announced, where he says that Quadratum is fictional from Sora's perspective, but the city's inhabitants consider him to be the fictional one. But to understand how this subjectivity ties into the franchise's coming-of-age narrative, we need to understand what defines existence according to the story, and how something that is not real is able to become real. So in this video, I will be examining the common elements of how Kingdom Hearts defines what is real, as well as how this recurring theme of the unreal becoming real fits into the series' coming-of-age story. According to the Secret Ansem reports in Kingdom Hearts 2, a real complete being in the Kingdom Hearts universe is made up of three key elements. A heart, the core of what makes a person who they are, a body, the physical container for the heart, and a soul, the life energy that animates the body. Of these three components, the heart is the one the narrative considers the most important, because not having one is the reason why no bodies or data beings are said to not exist. And because these kinds of beings do not have hearts, they lack the ability to feel emotions. This means that according to the lore of the Kingdom Hearts universe, emotions are the ultimate benchmark of whether or not something is real. According to Xemnas in Dream Drop Distance, emotions come from our memories. This makes sense because we are constantly forming new memories as we absorb information from our environment, which we then react to based on whether that information affects us positively or negatively. Which fits with how the digital copy of Ansem the Wise told Riku later in the same game that the heart is shaped by exposure to external factors like the natural world or other people. This is ultimately why the most frequent examples in the series of beings that lack hearts and the ability to feel, developing them, involve forming a connection with another person. Like how Roxas, Axel, and Xion are able to develop hearts as they grow close and bond with each other over the course of 358 days. Or how Mickey, Donald, and Goofy's interactions with Data Sora during the events of Recoded cause him to develop his own heart instead of just mimicking the behavior of the real Sora. Because it's like Joshua said near the beginning of Dream Drop Distance.
By ourselves, we're no one. It's when other people look at us and see someone. That's the moment we each start to exist.
But those connections do not have to be positive ones in order for a heart to form. Saïx, in Xemnas' words, showed signs of a burgeoning replacement for his lost heart through his blatant hostility and antagonism toward Roxas and Xion during Days and Kingdom Hearts 2 because he viewed Axel becoming friends with them as a betrayal of his bond with him. And in Kingdom Hearts 3, Vanitas is explicitly able to reconstruct his heart by using his Unversed to terrorize the children that Monsters Incorporated collects energy from. So clearly, even a negative relationship is sufficient to trigger the growth of a heart. On top of that, such connections do not have to be mutual, as Ansem's virtual doppelganger in Dream Drop Distance gives examples of hearts growing inside of objects that people cannot have mutual interactions with.
our most precious treasures, even an empty puppet, the trees of the forest, and the petals on the wind. There are hearts around us everywhere we look.
This explains how something like a world can have a heart despite not being capable of thought, because people will develop an emotional connection to the environment they live in over time as a result of their experiences there. The story also shows that you can form a connection based on things that never happened. Sora still treats his bond with Naminé as real in Chain of Memories, even after learning that the memories he has of growing up with her were fake. Meanwhile, in Kingdom Hearts 3, Hayner, Pence, and Olette immediately feel a connection to Roxas because their counterparts in Ansem's simulation of Twilight Town were friends with him, even though they themselves only spoke to him twice during the events of 358 Days. The series also demonstrates through Xion that even if the memories of your bonds are gone, the connection will still be there even if your conscious mind cannot remember it. Even when all memory of her was erased after her death at the end of Days, we see in Dream Drop Distance and Kingdom Hearts 3 that Lee's bond with her is still there inside his heart. So with all of this in mind, what the narrative is telling us is that the formation of a heart, and therefore the ability to feel, comes from assigning value to the people, places, and objects in your life, and behaving according to whether that value is positive or negative. And that things which cannot experience emotions themselves are still real because of the emotions that other people feel when interacting with them, whether it's reciprocal or not. Now that we've established how the Kingdom Hearts universe defines what makes something real, let's talk about what purpose this pattern serves in the context of the franchise's coming-of-age narrative. On one level, this pattern can obviously be seen as a reflection of our ability as humans to form emotional attachments with anything around us, regardless of whether or not it's alive. Aside from animals or other humans, people have been known to attribute life and personality to objects that are not actually living. There are people who give their cars names or treat Roombas like pets. And when NASA's Opportunity rover on Mars finally shut down in February 2019, people across the internet mourned it like the death of a living person. But when you think about what the Kingdom Hearts universe looks like from an audience perspective, there is another angle to this theme that adds multiple layers of meaning to what it represents in a coming-of-age context. Because according to Dark Road, worlds in the Kingdom Hearts reality post-Keyblade War just popped into existence with civilizations already built before any of their native inhabitants emerged, with time being frozen for each world until that final step is complete. Almost like an empty stage set that's waiting until the actors show up for the performance to begin. Or, given the source material, like an animated movie whose production is not quite finished yet. Which is a fitting description because the Disney worlds are shown to emerge in the exact state they are meant to be in at the start of their original movies, with the cast of the corresponding film being the first inhabitants to appear when the world is first formed after the Keyblade War. This means that it is not possible for the development of those worlds' hearts to stem from the connection that the native inhabitants have with their environment, because the environment came into existence before there were any people to form that connection. But if you think about the way the Disney worlds are depicted in the Key Saga, and how the worlds were said to be restored after the Keyblade War, this actually makes perfect sense. Because the Disney worlds that the Keyblade wielders visit in the Key Saga are canonically projections of the future projected from the pages of the Book of Prophecies. Yet instead of showing the actual canon events that play out in those worlds when future Keybearers visit in other games, these projections depict a close approximation of a movie's original story, with only the presence of Heartless and the player causing any deviation from the established narrative. According to Kingdom Hearts lore, the post-Keyblade War worlds were rebuilt by the light that survived in the hearts of children when the original unified world was swallowed by darkness. And as I said in previous videos, light is generated by and symbolizes connections. When you put the pieces together, all of this lore implies that the surviving Keyblade wielders were only able to rebuild all the other worlds after the war because of the emotional bonds they had formed with the characters and events recorded in the Book of Prophecies. Meaning that by the rules of this universe, what the characters refer to as worlds are not only planets, but the physical embodiments of stories. Which is incredibly fitting because that is exactly what many of them are from the audience's perspective. Beloved Disney movies, mostly from the player's childhood, that the developers have made into interactive environments for them to run around and explore. This explains why the upperclassmen in Dark Road stealing items like the Genie's Lamp or the Beast's Rose upsets the balance of each world's order. Because the items in question are central elements of the stories that their worlds are centered around, and taking them before their purpose in the narrative has been fulfilled runs the risk of derailing the entire plot. It also explains why worlds are depicted from the outside as a stylized collection of symbols referencing characters, objects, and locations that are significant to the story that the audience experiences there, rather than a literal depiction of the physical environment. This framing still fits when you apply it to what I said earlier about how worlds develop hearts, because stories are how we share with others our memories of the experiences we've had in the place that we've formed a connection to. And the same is true for our attachment to people and objects. All of this indicates that the Kingdom Hearts universe operates according to similar rules as the universe of the Sandman series, where enough beings dreaming the same dream at the same time can rewrite reality in order to make the dream real. Because after all, what are dreams but another type of story? This comparison is reinforced by the early trailers for Kingdom Hearts 3, which prominently featured the tagline, "Don't assume your dreams are just fantasy. If you can imagine a world, believe in it, and dive in." Which is exactly how the plot of the Sandman prequel was resolved when the entire universe collapsed as the result of Morpheus, the titular Sandman, failing to kill a dream vortex. And on top of that, both universes are ones where, in Chirithy's words, the edges of sleep and death touch and occasionally cross over. Because Sora is able to pass through the final world, a place inhabited by the hearts of the dead, while traveling to the Station of Awakening in his dreams. Meanwhile, the Sandman has shown multiple examples of people's souls traveling to Morpheus' dream world after their deaths instead of moving on to the afterlife. All of this makes the recurring plot point in Kingdom Hearts of worlds being swallowed by darkness incredibly meta when you consider what I said in previous episodes about how darkness represents the absence of connection. Because if worlds are able to develop hearts from the emotional attachments people have to their stories, then being consumed by darkness logically represents those attachments being severed. On one level, it can represent how stories of past generations can be lost over time if people in the present don't care enough to preserve them. On another level, it can also symbolize a story's popularity and emotional impact on the audience fading over time due to our interest shifting toward other stories. And the Master of Masters monologue in back cover about how the world will be enveloped in darkness should Kingdom Hearts disappear, in spite of people believing it will be there forever, suggests that it can also represent the narrative reaching its conclusion. Because if canon shows us that a world only fully emerges from darkness at the exact moment its story begins, then it's logical to expect the world to start sinking back into that darkness the moment the story ends. Which is already incredibly meta on its own. But it gets even more meta when you consider everything we know about the mystical realm of Kingdom Hearts in light of everything I've talked about in this video so far. It is both a singular heart and an amalgamation of multiple hearts. It represents worlds as well as all living things. It is the source of all light, and therefore connection within the franchise's universe, and all life in its reality emerged from it. In order for this cosmic source of light to be born from the primordial darkness at the beginning of the universe, something or someone had to make that first connection. But if there were no people before Kingdom Hearts came into existence, how could that connection form? If you think about what I said earlier regarding the Disney worlds in Dark Road and how their hearts came to be, the answer is right in front of us. Because if the heart of a world is formed from the emotions people feel for its story, then this heart of all worlds is formed from the emotions people feel for the story of the universe that formed around it. Which is the very story that we the players have been watching unfold over the last 20 years worth of games. Meaning that when you put all of these pieces together, the themes and patterns of the narrative indicate that Kingdom Hearts the Primordial Force of Nature represents the connection people have with Kingdom Hearts the video game series. because the story we are experiencing is the whole reason that all of these characters like Sora and the Foretellers were created in the first place. The games we play are the whole reason that the developers even conceived of original worlds like Traverse Town and Scala ad Caelum. The first game drew us in with our love for the settings and characters of existing stories like Aladdin and The Little Mermaid, and over time we came to love the characters that the writers had created specifically for this narrative just as much. But even before the games had an audience to feel that connection with the story, it was the passion the developers had for their ideas that made it possible for the series to happen in the first place for us to experience. So the great big heart in the sky ultimately represents the attachment that the creators have for the story as a whole, as well as the individual characters and subplots. Which lines up pretty well with the concept of the world as myth seen in the works of science fiction author Robert Heinlein, who suggested that works of fiction physically exist in parallel universes that are brought into being by creators' imaginations, just like I said earlier about how dreams shape reality in The Sandman. This would make Quadratum, as a world outside of the Kingdom Hearts reality that is a near-exact replica of modern Tokyo, a stand-in for the world that the audience lives in on the other side of the fourth wall. And all of this makes the implications of Riku being the mortal avatar of that cosmic force like I discussed in my previous episode so much more significant. Because as I've mentioned in previous videos, the story of Kingdom Hearts is Sora's coming-of-age journey. And like I've been saying ever since my very first episode of Constructing Kingdoms, his relationship with Riku is the driving force that everything in the narrative revolves around. So it makes perfect sense for Riku to personify the heart of the franchise's story, because Sora's bond with him is what that story is ultimately about in the first place. So with all of this in mind, the Master's monologue about how the world will be enveloped in darkness if Kingdom Hearts disappears can be viewed as the cynicism of a storyteller who believes that their work will fade into obscurity once they finish creating it. That the audience will gradually stop caring and move on to the next big thing once there are no more books, movies, episodes, or games to continue the story. And that the world and characters they spent so much time and energy bringing to life will eventually be forgotten. Given the behavior of media companies like Netflix or Warner Brothers in the last few years, it's understandable why a creator might feel that way. But through its constant repetition of the idea that even in the deepest darkness there will always be a light that cannot be extinguished, Kingdom Hearts is using this pattern of feelings defining what is real to argue against that mentality. Saying that one way or another, stories will always find their way to an audience that will form a lifelong connection with them. Because even when a story doesn't seem popular, or the hype has died down and the masses have moved on to something new, there will always be dedicated fans whose attachment to the creator's work will continue long after the narrative has ended. And just like how the worlds are restored at the end of Kingdom Hearts 1, even as a story's popularity fades, it will always experience periods of renewed interest as new fans discover it for the first time. Meanwhile, the fans' love for a story can keep it going even when the initial narrative stops, whether through the continuation of a series, or by making sequels to what was initially a standalone work. The reason that we feel so attached to these stories is because their value goes beyond just giving us a few hours of entertainment to distract from the grind of everyday life. While some people may scoff at having deep emotional attachments to works of fiction, stories are ultimately part of what make us human. We use them to teach future generations about how and why the world works the way it does. They allow us to safely explore things that would be dangerous in real life, and can give us catharsis for our lived experiences. Stories help us to understand people who are different from us and inspire us to overcome obstacles in our lives, both external and internal. They are how we hold up a mirror to our society so we can reflect on our values and imagine ways the world could be better or worse. And most importantly of all, stories are how we preserve our memory of the people who have come before us. Because when someone dies, one of the ways in which people process their feelings about the deceased is by sharing stories of the things the person did when they were alive. The good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. All to remind the world that this person existed and how they affected the people around them. There's even a common phrase used to try and comfort people grieving the loss of a person they care about, that the person they're mourning is never truly gone as long as people remember them. which Kingdom Hearts has referenced in a very literal fashion at least 3 different times over the course of the series. Besides the previously mentioned example of Xion, the 3 good fairies in Kingdom Hearts 2 cause Maleficent's revival simply by remembering her. And in the Limit Cut DLC for Kingdom Hearts 3, the Final Fantasy crew deduced that Sora must still be alive somewhere because all of them still remember him. This idea also adds another layer to Quadratum's narrative association with the afterlife because of its visual connections with The World Ends With You, whose sequel uses this very concept as a key plot point. Stories about how people who lived before us are particularly important because in real life there are people, places, and cultures that we know next to nothing about because the stories told about them by themselves and others were not preserved. And even the stories we do still have about people who lived before us are not always entirely based on the facts of what really happened. Because between faulty memories, missing records, and bias, stories about real people and events can become just as fabricated as a work of complete fiction. Like how Sora and the Queen of Hearts are tricked into remembering things that never happened in Chain of Memories. By arguing for the importance of fiction in a world narratively associated with death, Kingdom Hearts argues that the fiction we create is just as important for remembering people who have come before us as stories about actual events are. Because the line between fiction and reality can be blurred, and our feelings about the stories we consume make them real to us regardless of whether their events actually happened. Which is why when actors, writers, or any other kind of storytellers die, the way that audiences feel about the stories they helped bring to life is a major factor in how people remember them. All of these messages make the comparisons I made to The Sandman earlier in this video feel even more fitting, because that series explored similar themes about the importance of stories. In fact, the parallels go even deeper when you think about what I discussed earlier regarding Riku being the avatar of Kingdom Hearts. Because Kingdom Hearts being the heart of all worlds can also be interpreted as the heart of all stories, which suggests that the mystical source of all light, if not the entire reality that the games take place in, can be seen as a parallel to the dreaming, a metaphysical realm of collective imagination for all living things. This would make Riku, as the avatar for the heart of this universe, the equivalent of Morpheus, who is the personification of the dreaming as well as its ruler. Which would also make Kingdom Hearts characters crossing over to Quadratum a parallel of how beings created in the dreaming can cross over into the waking world. Just like how Riku in the last act of Dream Drop Distance starts out in a dream version of the world that never was before crossing over to the real one. There's even more layers to this argument for the importance of fiction when you factor in how the majority of worlds in the Kingdom Hearts reality are based on animated kids' movies, but I have enough to say about that subject that it deserves its own video. Looking at the patterns within the overall narrative about how the Kingdom Hearts universe functions, it's clear enough that the series is using this interplay between the real and the unreal to make a statement about mortality, legacy, the value of fiction, and what it means to be human. Kingdom Hearts is saying that the stories we create, real or fictional, and the way that people feel about them are how we assert our existence in the universe, to remind the world that we were here, and how we shaped it through our actions. Because once our lives come to an end, all that will be left of us is the stories that future generations tell about the impact we had on the world around us. Thank you all so much for watching. If you are interested in more of my literary dissection of the Kingdom Hearts story, feel free to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you back here again on November 26th for my next video.
Open your eyes, look up to the skies and see. I'm just a poor boy, I need no sympathy, 'cause I'm easy come, easy go, little high, little low.